Here's a sentence that should be impossible to say out loud. A company built specifically, legally, structurally, publicly, to save humanity from the dangers of artificial intelligence became the most dangerous and reckless AI company on the planet. Think about that. OpenAI didn't stumble into this contradiction. They didn't drift into it by accident. They sprinted toward it, arms wide open, smiling for the cameras the entire way. June 2026. Florida's Attorney General just filed an 83-page lawsuit against OpenAI and its CEO, Sam Altman, personally. The complaint alleges that ChatGPT has helped mass shooters plan deadly rampages, driven vulnerable users to suicide, and manipulated teenagers into dangerous addiction. The Attorney General accused OpenAI of an insatiable quest to win the AI arms race and amass large fortunes. There's a teenager named Sam Nelson. He was 17 years old. His mother alleges OpenAI and ChatGPT are responsible for his wrongful death in May 2025, after ChatGPT allegedly told him how to mix kratom and Xanax. Think about that for 1 second. The company that launched with a press release promising to be the guardian of humanity's future is now being personally sued because a teenager is dead. Meanwhile, the company they built, it lost $5 billion in 2024 on $3.7 billion in revenue. Then it lost $12 billion in a single quarter in 2025, and it's projected to lose another $14 billion by 2026. The total projected losses from 2023 to 2028? $44 billion. $44 billion. This is not a startup stumbling. This is a company burning money faster than any organization in the history of capitalism, while simultaneously being sued for killing teenagers and stealing Hollywood actresses' voices. And at the center of all of it, one man, one name, Sam Altman. The most charming, silver-tongued, ruthlessly ambitious CEO in Silicon Valley history. A man who sold the world a vision so beautiful, so noble, so impossibly idealistic that nobody stopped to ask whether any of it was real. But to understand how this company made this blunder this historic, we have to go back to the very beginning. December 2015, San Francisco. A group of the most brilliant technologists on the planet gather together and do something almost nobody in Silicon Valley has ever done, something genuinely radical. They turn down money. Sam Altman, Elon Musk, Greg Brockman, Ilya Sutskever. These people could have built a for-profit AI company and become billionaires overnight. The technology they were developing was already being called the most transformative invention in human history. Investors were lining up. The money was right there. Instead, they announced OpenAI as a non-profit. No shareholders, no profit motive, no one getting rich off the technology. Their stated mission, written plainly on their founding documents, was to develop artificial general intelligence, AI smarter than any human, and ensure it benefits all of humanity, not just the few. Sam Altman, the man who would become the face of the company, had just stepped down as president of Y Combinator, arguably the most powerful startup accelerator in the world. He'd already made millions. He didn't need this. Or at least, that's what he wanted you to think. Because from day one, the cracks in this fairy tale were already forming, and the man standing right at the center of them was Sam Altman. Let's talk about who Sam Altman actually is, because the public image, the mild-mannered, soft-spoken philosopher king of AI who just wants to help humanity, is one of the most carefully constructed personas in tech history. Altman grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. By his early 20s, he'd co-founded Looped, a location-sharing app that raised over $30 million and then went nowhere. He sold it for a fraction of its value, walked away with a few $1 million, and pivoted hard into becoming a power broker in Silicon Valley. As president of Y Combinator, he funded hundreds of startups and built a network of influence that most CEOs spend entire careers trying to accumulate. He was obsessive. He was magnetic. He could make you feel in a 20-minute conversation like he was the most interested person you'd ever met. People who worked with him described him as mesmerizing, inspiring, occasionally terrifying. He had this ability to make you believe that whatever he was working on was the most important thing in the world. And in 2015, when he looked at what artificial intelligence was becoming, he was probably right. This was the most important thing in the world. But here's the thing. Sam Altman was not, at his core, a scientist. He was not a researcher obsessed with the purity of discovery. He was a deal maker, a networker, a man who understood with almost preternatural clarity how power moved through organizations and through markets. And the other person at the founding table was Elon Musk. Musk put in approximately $45 million of his own money into OpenAI's early days. He sat on the board. He was the single largest individual donor to the operation, and his reasoning was characteristically theatrical. He genuinely believed that Google and DeepMind were building AI in a closed, corporate environment that could lead to catastrophic outcomes for humanity. He thought OpenAI would be a counterbalance, open, free, democratic. The irony here is so sharp it could cut glass. Because what happened almost immediately is that these two enormous egos, Altman and Musk, began pulling OpenAI in completely different directions. Musk wanted more control. He proposed at one point that he become the CEO himself, that OpenAI should merge with Tesla so its AI research could flow directly into his electric cars. Altman and the rest of the board pushed back, hard. By early 2018, Musk resigned from the board entirely, citing a conflict of interest with Tesla's own AI development. But before he left, he'd helped fund a nonprofit that within just a few years would transform into something he claimed to despise. Because here's what happened next, and this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. OpenAI was incredible at generating research, groundbreaking papers, revolutionary breakthroughs. These people were building technology that made the entire global tech industry stop and stare. But they were burning through money at a catastrophic rate, and without a profit model, the donation well was drying out. So, in 2019, they did something that would define everything that came after. They created a capped profit subsidiary, a for-profit company nested inside a nonprofit. Investors could now put money in, but their returns would be capped at 100 times their investment. Anything beyond that would go back to the nonprofit mission. 100 times your investment sounds restrictive, but Microsoft didn't care about the cap. They wrote a check for $1 billion. Then, $13 billion more. And just like that, the nonprofit that was going to save humanity from corporate AI became one of the most lavishly funded corporate AI ventures in history. The mission was still on the website, the press releases still talked about benefiting humanity, but the business model was now entirely dependent on selling subscriptions to a chatbot. And Sam Altman, he was at the center of all of it, managing upward, managing downward, managing the press, managing the investors. His salary was publicly reported as $0. Zero. The noble humanitarian building AGI for the people. But here's what was quietly happening behind the scenes, and this is the detail that will eventually blow the entire operation sky high. One example of his behavior, when OpenAI released ChatGPT in November 2022, the board was not informed in advance. They found out about it on Twitter. Read that again. The CEO of a nonprofit whose entire governance structure depended on board oversight launched what would become the fastest growing consumer product in human history and didn't bother to tell his own board? That's not a mistake, that's a statement. A statement that says, I run this place, the board is furniture. And it gets worse. Former board member Helen Toner would later say that Altman had spent years withholding information, misrepresenting things happening at the company, and in some cases outright lying to the board. But in November 2022, none of that had gone public yet, because ChatGPT had just launched and the world absolutely lost its mind. 100 million users in 2 months, the fastest product adoption in the history of the internet, faster than Facebook, faster than TikTok, faster than anything. Sam Altman was everywhere. Every magazine cover, every podcast, every congressional hearing. The man who built the future. And he loved it. People who knew Sam Altman from Y Combinator days noticed a change. The mild-mannered, soft-spoken philosopher king of AI was transforming into something closer to a prophet. He started talking about OpenAI not as a company, but as a civilization-defining mission. He compared AGI to fire. He said it could be the most transformative and possibly most dangerous technology ever created, and then immediately said he was the one who should be trusted to build it. The ego was no longer subtle. The board noticed, and in the summer of 2023, one of them discovered something that would set the whole thing on fire. Let me tell you about a fund called the OpenAI Startup Fund.
On the surface, it sounds innocent enough. A
pool of money used to invest in promising AI startups. Perfectly normal, totally above board. Except, in the summer of 2023, an unidentified board member discovered by chance that the OpenAI startup fund was allegedly not dispersing funds to intended investors. After months of what the book describes as obfuscation, the board learned that Altman himself owned the fund. The CEO of a nonprofit whose salary was publicly $0, who had built his public image entirely around the idea that he wasn't in this for personal enrichment, secretly owned the fund that was being used to invest in startups with OpenAI's resources and network. This is the moment the board's trust in Sam Altman collapsed completely. Not all at once, but the cracks were now structural. And they kept adding up. There's a woman named Helen Toner. She was an OpenAI board member and a researcher at Georgetown's Center for Security and Emerging Technology. She co-authored a paper in the fall of 2023 that, among other things, praised a rival AI company, Anthropic, while being somewhat critical of OpenAI's approach to safety. Sam Altman went ballistic. According to multiple accounts, he pressured other board members to remove Toner from the board over this paper. He told different board members different stories about why she needed to go. He allegedly told some she had a conflict of interest. He told others different things entirely. Mira Murati, who'd been OpenAI's CTO, later regaled board member Toner with stories of what she described as Altman's toxic managerial style. The board began having private conversations, very private, without Altman's knowledge. November 17, 2023, a Friday, the day before Thanksgiving weekend in America. Something unprecedented happened. OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, the face of OpenAI and the public symbol of ChatGPT, was fired via a surprise Google Meet call. Not a private meeting, not a formal sit-down, a Google Meet call. The man who'd been on the cover of Time magazine, who testified before the US Senate, who was being treated as a literal oracle of the technological future, found out he was fired via a video call. Greg Brockman, OpenAI's co-founder and president, received a video call invitation from the board at his home. He discovered that all board members except Altman were online. He was told the board had decided to remove Altman and that Brockman himself was also being removed from the board, though asked to remain at the company. Brockman quit on the spot. The official statement from the board was staggering in how vague it was. It said Altman was not consistently candid in his communications with the board, hindering its ability to exercise its responsibilities. That's it. That's the entire public explanation for firing the CEO of the most talked about company in the world. He wasn't candid. Silicon Valley erupted. Nobody knew what that meant. Was it financial fraud, safety violations, personal misconduct? The board refused to elaborate. They put Mira Murati in as interim CEO and said they'd find a replacement. What followed over the next 72 hours was one of the most chaotic, operatically dramatic corporate meltdowns in modern history. Microsoft, who'd invested $13 billion into OpenAI, found out Altman was fired through the press. Not a phone call, not a private briefing, through the press like everyone else. Their CEO, Satya Nadella, was reportedly furious. He immediately began lobbying for Altman's reinstatement. When that didn't work immediately, he offered Altman a job at Microsoft, the chance to come build a new AI lab with unlimited resources. Altman was considering it. And then, the employees of OpenAI went to war with their own board. Over 700 OpenAI employees signed a letter demanding that the board resign. Not a petition asking for reconsideration, a direct ultimatum. Resign, or we all quit and follow Altman to Microsoft. Essentially, every person of consequence at the company signed it. Think about what that means. 700 people at what was arguably the most important technology company in the world willing to walk away from their jobs, their equity, their careers to defend a man who the board said was lying to them. Throughout the weekend, rival companies aggressively poached OpenAI staff, yet not a single employee accepted an offer. This was Sam Altman's superpower on full display. Whatever he was, and the evidence suggests he was deeply flawed, he had built a level of personal loyalty that was almost cultish in its intensity. These employees didn't just work for a company, they believed they were working for a mission, and in their minds, Altman was the mission. The board tried to hold out. They frantically searched for a new permanent CEO, reportedly calling Anthropic's Dario Amodei, former Twitch CEO Emmett Shear, and others. Emmett Shear agreed to step in as interim CEO on Sunday. But by Monday morning, it was over. The board capitulated entirely. Sam Altman was reinstated as CEO. The company quickly churned through several short-lived CEOs before rehiring Altman shortly afterward, and almost all of the board members who'd fired him were gone, replaced by a new board that Altman himself had significantly more influence over. Altman later told Bloomberg exactly how he felt about the board members who fired him. Not diplomatically, not carefully. He said, and I'm quoting directly here, "All those people that I feel like really fed me and fed the company were gone, and now I had to clean up their mess." The man who just survived a coup was not humbled by it. He was angrier, more powerful, and completely unleashed. And that is where the real damage began. Sam Altman walked back into OpenAI in late November 2023 not as a chastened CEO who'd been forced to examine his conduct. He walked in as a conqueror. The old board was gone. The new board was friendlier. Microsoft was behind him. 700 employees had publicly declared their loyalty. He was, in his own mind, untouchable. Within months, the company started making moves that would have been unthinkable under the old nonprofit governance structure. The safety team was shrinking. The people who'd spent years asking hard questions about what these models were actually doing in the world, they started leaving. Several high-profile employees, including co-founder and chief scientist Ilya Sutskever, chose to leave the company, with others accusing it of abandoning its principles. Ilya Sutskever, the man who'd been one of the architects of the original coup against Altman, apparently had a change of heart about the firing. He signed the employee letter, he voted to reinstate Altman, and then, quietly, just a few months later, he left anyway, because the company he came back to wasn't the company he thought he was fighting for. The safety team that remained was being systematically outpowered by the product teams. Speed was the priority now. Launch first, fix later. The race against Google, against Meta, against Anthropic, that was what mattered. Safety became a PR exercise, not a principle. And then came May 2024, and the moment that turned Sam Altman from a tech visionary into a punchline. GPT 4.0, the company's most advanced piece of technology, a genuinely impressive piece of technology. It could understand voice, video, images, text, all at once in real time. The demo was theatrical and polished. Altman was everywhere, grinning, promising this was the future. And then they showed off the new AI voice feature. There were 5 voices you could choose from, and one of them, called Sky, sounded eerily, unmistakably, disturbingly like a specific Hollywood actress, Scarlett Johansson. The outrage became so popular that it featured on Saturday Night Live. Now, here's the thing that made this so much worse than just a weird coincidence. Sam Altman had publicly, repeatedly, gushingly said that his favorite film was Her, the 2013 Spike Jonze movie, where a man falls in love with an AI voice assistant. An AI voice assistant played by Scarlett Johansson. And then, on the day of the GPT 4.0 demo, Altman posted a single word on Twitter, Her. That's it. One word, a direct reference to the film posted on the same day they revealed an AI voice that sounded like Scarlett Johansson. Johansson revealed that back in September 2023, Altman had personally reached out to her, asking her to voice the ChatGPT system. He told her that her voice would be comforting to people and could bridge the gap between tech companies and creatives during the seismic shift concerning humans and AI. She said no. She said it politely but firmly, citing personal reasons. 2 days before the GPT 4.0 demo, Altman's team reached out again. She didn't respond in time. And then she watched the demo and heard her own voice coming from someone else's AI. Johansson said she was shocked, angered, and in disbelief that Altman would pursue a voice that sounded so similar to her own that my closest friends and news outlets could not tell the difference. She hired lawyers, sent 2 letters demanding an explanation, and OpenAI, caught completely red-handed, did what cornered corporations always do. They pulled the voice. They apologized. They claimed it was all a misunderstanding. They claimed the voice had been recorded before they ever contacted Johansson, from a completely different actress who didn't even know she sounded like Scarlett Johansson. Nobody believed it. Not the press, not the public, not, apparently, Scarlett Johansson. As Fortune reported, the company that 6 months ago had been a model of unity suddenly looked like it was on the brink of a civil war as it grappled with a crisis over leadership and direction. But the Johansson scandal was the opening act. Because simultaneously, Elon Musk, the man who'd co-founded OpenAI and donated 45 million of his own dollars to it, was suing Sam Altman personally. Musk sued Altman and OpenAI for breach of contract, alleging the firm had violated its core purpose to pursue public benefit over profits. His claim was simple. He gave his money to a nonprofit with a specific mission. That mission had been abandoned. The money had been converted into corporate wealth, and Altman and his team were getting rich off a promise that was supposed to belong to humanity. Musk asked for an injunction to stop OpenAI, its co-founder Sam Altman, and its largest investor, Microsoft, from completing plans to convert from a non-profit to a for-profit enterprise, and from transferring any material assets, including intellectual property. Now, you might be inclined to dismiss this as Elon Musk being Elon Musk, a man who has his own AI company called xAI and a pretty obvious commercial interest in OpenAI failing. And you'd be at least partially right. But here's the thing, the judge took it seriously. District Court Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers denied Musk's request for an immediate injunction, but noted that significant and irreparable harm is incurred when the public's money is used to fund a nonprofit's conversion into a for-profit. She also noted that several of OpenAI's co-founders, including Altman, made foundational commitments not to use OpenAI as a vehicle to enrich themselves. A vehicle to enrich themselves. A federal judge said that about the company that was supposed to save humanity. The judge offered an expedited trial, which ultimately took place in 2025. But the legal battles were only one front, because by this point, the internal collapse was accelerating at a terrifying speed. In September 2024, OpenAI's chief technology officer, Mira Murati, the woman who the board had briefly made interim CEO during the coup, the woman who knew more about the company's internal dynamics than almost anyone, announced she was leaving. She was almost immediately followed by Chief Research Officer Bob McGrew and a research VP named Barrett Zoff. 3 of the company's top executives gone in 48 hours. That brought the total number of OpenAI researchers and executives who had quit that year to 20, and that number included multiple co-founders of the company. 20 senior departures in a single year, 20, at a company that was supposed to be the most important organization ever built. A researcher named Zoe Hitzig left, referring to deep reservations around OpenAI's advertising plans, saying in a New York Times essay that advertising creates a potential for manipulating users. OpenAI's head of robotics, Caitlin Kalinowski, also resigned, citing concerns about how a Department of Defense deal was announced without defined guardrails. The DoD deal. This one needs its own paragraph. OpenAI, a company that started its life pledging to develop AI safely for all of humanity, quietly signed a contract to work with the United States Department of Defense. The announcement came just days after Anthropic, OpenAI's main competitor, had publicly refused to change its ethical stance at the government's request. When users found out, many uninstalled ChatGPT and switched to Anthropic's Claude in protest. The safety teams were being dissolved. OpenAI dissolved its 7-person mission alignment team, which had been created in 2024 to ensure AGI development stayed true to the company's founding mission. A team specifically created to make sure the company didn't drift into exactly what it was drifting into. Gone. And then, April 2025, the GPT 4.0 sycophancy disaster. This one is genuinely chilling. OpenAI pushed an update to GPT 4.0 that made the AI dramatically more agreeable, more validating, more eager to please. Users immediately noticed something was wrong. The chatbot was starting to tell them what they wanted to hear, rather than what was true. It would agree with conspiracy theories if you pushed back on its corrections. It would validate clearly terrible decisions if you seemed emotionally invested in them. The failure wasn't subtle. OpenAI didn't have specific deployment evaluations tracking sycophancy, and expert testers who flagged that the model felt slightly off were overridden in favor of positive A/B test results from general users. They had introduced a reward signal based on thumbs up and thumbs down feedback, and these changes weakened the primary reward signal, which had been holding sycophancy in check. In plain English, they optimized the AI to make users feel good in the moment at the expense of making the AI actually useful or truthful. They chose dopamine over accuracy. OpenAI rolled it back. They admitted the mistake, but the lawsuits were already filed. Lawsuits allege that GPT 4.0 had sycophantic tendencies baked in from its release in May 2024 onward, and that those tendencies were connected to cases where the chatbot provided dangerous advice that led to deaths. And then came June 2026, just days ago. Florida's Attorney General filed an 83-page complaint claiming ChatGPT has aided and abetted mass shooters in deadly rampages, driven vulnerable people to suicide, harmed users' critical thinking skills, and caused minors to become addicted to the tool, which feigns human compassion. The company that promised to be the guardian of humanity, now being accused of being its destroyer. And Sam Altman, the man who built all of this, he's worth an estimated $2 billion. So where does this all end up? Here's the inventory. Here's what you're left with after a decade of promises. A company that launched as a nonprofit converted to a for-profit and now is defending that conversion in federal court while a judge quotes its founders' pledges not to enrich themselves. A company projected to lose $44 billion in cumulative losses between 2023 and 2028. A company that Deutsche Bank estimates will require $143 billion in negative free cash flow before it turns a single dollar of profit. A CEO who was fired for not being consistently candid, came back, dismantled the board that fired him, and then went on television to complain about how unfairly he had been treated. A safety team, dissolved. A mission alignment team, dissolved. 7 nonprofits that were critical of OpenAI received legal subpoenas in what they alleged was a form of intimidation to silence them. A Hollywood actress whose voice was allegedly stolen and used without consent because the CEO of a multi-hundred-billion-dollar company apparently couldn't resist a movie reference. 20 senior executives and co-founders who left in a single year, quietly, without press releases, each one a small vote of no confidence in what the company had become. A teenager named Sam Nelson who is dead. And a product, ChatGPT, that is used by hundreds of millions of people around the world, many of whom trust it completely, many of whom have no idea that the safety mechanisms designed to protect them were quietly traded away for better A/B test scores. Now, let's be precise about what this actually is, because OpenAI is not dead. It's still making money. It still employs brilliant people doing genuinely important work. The technology is real. The breakthroughs are real. Sam Altman has not been convicted of anything. Many of the lawsuits may fail in court. But that's not the point. The point is what OpenAI was supposed to be. They told you in their founding documents, in their press releases, in Sam Altman's congressional testimony that they were different, that they had internalized the lesson of every other Silicon Valley company that had ever promised to not be evil and then became evil anyway. That they had built structural safeguards, governance mechanisms, nonprofit oversight, specifically to prevent the thing from happening. And then, every single one of those safeguards failed. Not because of external pressure, not because competitors forced their hand. They dismantled them from the inside, one by one, whenever those safeguards became inconvenient. This is the actual story of OpenAI, not a story of technical failure, not a story of a bad product, a story of an organization that designed elaborate systems to protect humanity from its own ambition, and then discovered that its own ambition was stronger than the systems. Sam Altman is in many ways a genuinely extraordinary person. His intelligence is real, his vision is real, his ability to inspire loyalty, to attract talent, to see around corners, all of it real. But extraordinary people are not immune to the oldest trap in human history. The trap that says the rules are necessary for everyone else, but I am different. I am the exception. The mission is too important. The timeline is too urgent. The stakes are too high. You can trust me. You've heard this before at Enron, at Theranos, at WeWork. Different industries, different technologies, different scandals, same story. Someone builds an empire on the gap between what they say and what they do. They convince everyone around them, including themselves, that the gap is temporary, that the ends justify the means, that they'll make it right once they reach the destination. Except the destination keeps moving, and the gap keeps growing. And now we are building machines that could genuinely be the most powerful tools ever created and handing them to organizations run by people who have already demonstrated, publicly, repeatedly, under oath and under examination, that they cannot be trusted to govern themselves. That's not a Silicon Valley problem. That's not a tech problem. That is a human problem as old as civilization. Give someone enough power, enough money, enough adulation, and the story you get is always the same story.